Alright guys, welcome back. It's time to author up some funky bass goodness for Miss Clara here. Next thing we're going to be doing is authoring the expert bass part for Heartstrings. And as always, let's just take a quick look on the creator's site so you can see where you would find the documentation for what we'll be covering here under authoring. Just scroll down and there's a section here with all the different instruments. Guitar and bass are authored almost the exact same way. There's a couple minor differences, but the process is very similar. So I just wanted you to see where that is. Back here in our Reaper project, I'm going to expand the bass section because that's what we're going to be working on. So here's the wave file for the actual bass part, and then here is the MIDI chart that we'll be working with. And notice the template came with a couple placeholder notes right here at the beginning just to help it get through an initial magma compile, but that's not really where the bass part comes in, so we'll just delete those. And then if we scan forward, just looking at the wave here, we'll see when it becomes active. So right here around measure 6. The bass part plays in unison with her little vocal lead-in. So that's the first little riff that we'll chart in here, and I'm going to have the bass track soloed, and then I've got the level for this track artificially bumped up just to make it easier for you to hear it coming through my ambient speakers here, just for the purpose of this recording. I really never use these faders to make level adjustments in the mix, just because it's easy for them to start distorting. In fact, you may even hear this bass track start to distort as I'm playing through it here, so try to ignore that. I usually use a limiter down here on my effects track to make adjustments if I need something to be louder or softer. It's just a little better way to do it, and I'll probably spend more time talking about that on one of the other instruments where it's maybe a little bit easier to hear the difference. So coming back in here to the MIDI chart, starts right here on the third beat of that 6th measure, and all my charting I'm going to be working on right now is going to be up here on these expert lanes, and then just like you saw me do on the drums, we'll come back in a later episode and reduce for the easier difficulty levels. So if you listen to that riff again, it's a pretty long little run descending down, definitely longer than the 5 lanes we have to work with. So we're going to have to do what's called wrapping, which is where you'll descend down the notes, orange being the highest sounding note and green being the lowest. At some point we'll have to kind of go around the horn and come back up to orange and work our way back down again. It's called wrapping. So usually what I like to do when you've got those long sustains is, instead of dragging them out and trying to figure out exactly where they begin and end right away, I'll just punch in individual 16th notes to get the note changes or the chord changes, and then once I feel like they're on the right lane, I'll come back and adjust them out to be the right duration. Not everybody does it that way, but it's just kind of my personal preference. So this note here on measure 7 I think is as high as that riff gets. You want to kind of hear where the extremes are, so you know, like, oh, that's definitely going to be down on the green. And then we'll figure out what is happening before and after. So, okay, I'm going to build up here. I'll start in the middle, because I know this doesn't really sound like a super low note. So I'm just going to do a little triplet here on YBO. And then one thing you can do if you're going up and then back down and you want to compare notes to see you know, should this be on the same color as this one? I can't remember what that sounded like. If you're really fast on the space bar, you can actually listen to just an individual note. Bum, bum. And so you can actually compare two different notes, and as much as possible, if you can keep a note on the same gem representing the same note throughout the song, that's sort of your best case scenario. You will not always be able to do that, and in many cases there'll be a whole section of the song where you'll have to shift in order to accommodate a part where maybe the performer goes up a lot higher than they had on that same type of section earlier in the song, or down a lot lower. But if you can get that kind of consistency, it's really awesome. So if you hear that yellow gem, bump, it's hitting that. He's hitting that same note again here. So I'm gonna go. So now I have to go down to the green here. So I've essentially run out of lanes at that point. So what I'll do at that point is wrap back up to the orange, because that actually kind of starts its own little subsection of this riff here. So here's an example where this note that I'm punching in on red here, it's not really going to match either the yellow or the red back here. So I'm just kind of in some new territory here where I'm going to have to use that red to represent something different. But now we've got, I'll go ahead and stretch these sustains out. Typically want a minimum of a 16th note of space when you get to the end of a sustain here before the next one starts on expert. Expert, we're typically trying to get the notes exactly the way they sound, but if you don't have at least that 16th note of space there, it's going to be tough for the game engine to handle it as far as knowing when to mute or not mute if they miss when they're playing, and then also just in terms of readability on the chart and things like that. So I can stretch these out too. I'm just holding down the control key if I want to select multiple, and then I can click any of them and drag it out, and it'll do it to all of them. It's kind of a nice little shortcut. So even though we're going down here, we're going up to a technically what would be considered a higher lane. But that wrapping process is pretty common, and you're gonna have to do it quite a bit. So you're just always looking for the smartest place to do it. And in this case, it pretty much has to come up here to the orange. So that's the end of that little section. And then if I want to click over and see how it looks in the RBN preview window, then I just click, I can even unsolo the track to hear how it sounds with the rest of the song, and then just go into the RBN preview window and let it rip. So I've noticed on some of my other videos that when I go into that preview window, there may be some syncing issues, or even when I'm comparing the wave to what I'm hearing in the recording. Sometimes they look like they're a little out of sync, so I just wanted to reassure you that that's some kind of an issue with my recording software, not what I'm actually seeing in real life here. But then this rolls into the next riff, and so let's see what that sounds like. And that's kind of going to be the standard we're going to hear that riff a lot in this song. You'll notice when it cuts out for a bit there, just as a creative choice while she's doing that first verse. And here's the intro riff again. Slightly simplified version of it with a couple notes taken out. It's a funny thing, this love thing, it only falls into my arms and I'm not looking for it at all. So this riff I was about to go into, bum, 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 bum. Later he's playing it with some extra notes thrown in, but it's the same note progression. So if we do it here, we'll be able to paste it in later and just add in those extra notes. Let me solo it real quick. So just as a player, I also like to have as much separation as I can possibly get, just because it feels more fun to play if you can get the notes a little more spread out, at least on expert. But on this particular riff, I happen to know that at the end of the song, when they're going into their big finish, there's a variation of this bass riff where he actually goes up a little bit higher even than this note. And I just happened to notice that on an earlier listen. So I'm going to leave myself that orange lane to use in that final pass through this riff so that we have something to go up to, whereas right now if I author this riff so that we're going all the way up to orange, like if I did it like this, then later when we're playing that same riff and he goes up even higher, I've got nothing to go to and I would have to start rapping, which would be kind of unnecessary in this case because I can just leave myself a little bit of space. So it really helps if you spend some time with the track soloed, just listening to it before you even get into charting. You'll usually have to kind of fight that instinct early on because you want to get into just popping your notes in, but that can sometimes lead to having to redo your sections when you get to a later part in the song and find out, oh crap, now I essentially have to redo this whole part. That just repeats. So let me drag my durations out. So I'm going to copy that section. I just right click and drag if I want to select multiple notes. Hit Control C. Put the playhead where I want to paste those notes back in and hit Control V. This is probably a good time to talk about quantizing. It's really easy for Reaper to misplace notes when you paste for some reason. I believe it has to do with the fact that when you create your tempo map, you're really adjusting the durations of your measures. So they're all a tiny bit different, even if you can't see that, just from looking at it. And so what'll happen is occasionally you'll paste something in. It'll look like it's right on your grid line, but if you were to zoom way in, you would see that it's actually a tiny bit off. And that can become problematic with certain things that you need to do in your charting. So a good thing to get in the habit of after you paste is doing what's called quantizing. So if you go up to your actions menu and hit show action list, there's a ton of actions built into Reaper, and some of them have to do with quantizing. So if you just start typing a search for the word quantize, you're going to see quantize notes position to grid, and that will line up the beginning of your note with the nearest grid line. And I've actually got that hotkeyed to Control Q, which you may want to do. You can add hotkeys down here in this area. Otherwise, you just double click it off this menu and it will quantize anything that you've got highlighted. You can't really see any difference, but again, the reason we're quantizing is to make sure that if there was something that was just a tiny bit off, just a hair off of the grid line, it would bump it back on. So a lot of times you may hear me hitting my keyboard after I do a paste, and that's just me hitting Control Q to make sure that it's lined up just right. Okay, and then it drops out while she does that verse there. So here's where it comes back in. So So there's some repeating there. So now what I'm going to do is just jump ahead and show some of the other riffs that are in this song that we want to take care of.
It's a funny thing, this love thing.
That's one that happens throughout. So at the end of that descending riff, we're not going all the way down to the green, so we're going to land on the red. I'm going to go red, red, yellow. So she just does that twice, and that's where she's into the... Okay, so then the next little riff is actually comes in right after that. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where it's that same riff where we were up on the blue and yellow, but now he's added some eighth notes just to liven it up a little bit. So we're taking this riff, and we're going to split up those yellows into eighth notes instead of just those long sustains. So I'll paste that riff in from the earlier part of the song. So you notice the greens and the blues are the same, but those yellows have turned into our quarter notes, I think. Yep. So I'll just do these quick, he's doing these quick little kind of staccato quarter notes. And that repeats. So this is an interesting thing that'll happen sometimes, is you'll hear the bassist or the guitarist doing a slide in between notes, and I don't even know if you can hear that in the recording here, the way it's coming through my speakers. He's actually sliding between the notes. So you can do that a couple different ways. If there was a little bit more separation between these notes, you could add a note in between to sort of represent the sliding action. And then you can give them what's called a HOPO, or which stands for hammer on or pull off. And if you're not a guitarist, that basically means that after you strum a note on a particular string, you can hammer your finger onto the next fret to essentially shorten the string while it's still ringing, and you'll be able to go up a note. But it gives it a different tone because it doesn't have that same attack that you get from plucking the string or strumming it. It's a little smoother kind of legato type sound. Or the reverse is pulling a finger off to reveal the fret behind it to lengthen the string and make a lower note. And so the way that we simulate that in Rock Band is wherever we want that to happen on a note, we'll add another note up above it on this HOPO on lane, and that will basically make any notes below it be forced to be HOPOs, and you can actually stretch that out if you had a whole section where you wanted those. A lot of times you'll see that happening in a guitar solo where there's a really fast run of notes where the guitarist is just quickly hammering on and pulling off. And then within Rock Band authoring, there's also a distinction between authoring these where you're hearing them in the mix, because a lot of times you'll hear the difference and you'll want to author those. But then the other consideration is doing it from a perspective of playability to make your chart more comfortable to play, because things that might be comfortable to hammer on or pull off or not on a real guitar or bass are not necessarily the same thing on a Rock Band guitar. So it's just, you have to kind of take into consideration the comfort of how your chart feels to play. But the other place where we use these is simulating slides. And if I was going to do this, I might actually have you strum that yellow gem and then just hammer on the blue and orange notes after it to kind of simulate a sliding action. In this case, though, because I was actually going up to the blue, sometimes what I'll do to incorporate a feeling of a slide is I'll add the same note that's my destination note ahead of it. So I'm hammering up to this note, but you can't really hammer onto the same note, so this intermediate note would be the HOPO, and then you would strum the note following it. That's become a pretty common way to handle a slide where you're going between two gems that are adjacent to each other. And then if we want to see what that looks like, we can click over to the RBN preview window and just take a look at it. It's these little skinny notes. You're probably used to seeing those in the game if you play guitar or bass. The next riff I want to take a look at is a little later in the song. I think it was up around here somewhere. Ah, okay, it's where we finally get into the chorus. That's our low green gem tone again. So here he's doing a little slide action right here, so I might slide between those two notes. So I'll strum this note and I'll HOPO onto this sustain that comes right after it. Oops. So if I listen to that yellow gem, and then this next note after the long sustain is lower, but not as low as the green, so I pretty much have to go to the red. So it just becomes a process of elimination. It's a little bit like playing Sudoku or something where you put your gems where you know they have to go as much as possible, and then the gems in between will either sort of sort themselves out, or you'll at least be able to reduce the number of choices that you have so that it's not quite as overwhelming as just sitting there with a blank chart. It's got another little slide coming in here, so we could slide down the blue and yellow gems. Again, we just need to leave a 1/16 of space there after that sustain. And that has a good attack on it where he's definitely plucking that one. So he's kind of sliding down and then plucking on the red. So I just need to set my note accordingly up above here. I'm going to go up to blue there. That's just such a distinctive note. It's not the same as this blue gem we had earlier, but it's definitely not the yellow or the orange. So I'm just going to kind of split the difference there. And he's still doing a little bit of a slide there. And then that repeats again like the others. So that's pretty much the riffs that are happening in the bass arrangement on this song. The last thing I wanted to show you is at the end there, when they're going into the finale of the song. I want to say it was up around here. Here it comes. There it is. Okay, that right there, that's the orange that I was trying to leave room for earlier when I was charting this riff, but it was only going up to the blue. Because this is that same riff, but now he's altering it by going up higher. So let me grab the notes that I charted earlier. Gotta watch out for those stray notes. It's really easy to accidentally click your chart and end up punching something in that you don't mean to. So I'll just grab one instance of that. Get past it. There it is, measure 207. It transitions. So let me handle what's right before that. So that's our same exact riff from earlier. Remember, I'm quantizing after I do these paste operations just to make sure they're not, notes aren't getting out of sync with the grid. So right here, it's quarter notes, but we're still on that same note as this blue gem here, so I'll just pop some quarter notes in there. And then go up to the orange. You can hear him sliding in between there. So I'm going to add some little HOPO slides using the destination note since they're adjacent to each other. I'll copy that, paste it in again, quantize. And that's the end of the song. So let's just take a quick look at that last part in the preview window just to see how that's looking. Oh, let's see here. Forgot to turn those into, those are actually quarter notes as well. Whoops. It's always good to double check and triple check, especially when you're copying and pasting. It's very easy to feel like, oh, I've got that, I already charted that part, just reusing it. And there's always going to be something that's a little different. The performer's always going to want to change up their riff a little bit, so just because you've charted it once doesn't mean you can just go through and robotically paste it everywhere you hear something that sounds like that. You've still got to go through and listen to it note for note and make sure there aren't any little tricks happening, because there pretty much always are. Yay, we did it. Okay, so we'll be back next time to reduce for the easier difficulty levels, and then we'll animate up that bassist avatar, and then we'll be ready to move on to guitar. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.